welcome back to my POA podcast, Black Hand and Beyond. This is episode 21. We come to you from Enid, Oklahoma at Jackson's Auto Family, Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram. We usually come to you live every Tuesday. Once in a while we take a Tuesday off, but we're here this week to talk about George Bishop and St. Nick's Pony Farm. So it's going to be a fun episode again tonight. We have a lot of pictures to go through. We have a great guest from, I believe she lives in Minnesota now. She might correct me if she's wrong, if I'm wrong, but she was from Wisconsin when I knew her. And of course, that's Kelly Curtis, a very great person and a very good POA rider back in the day. And she has a lot of memories with some St. Nick's POAs and some good stories, great memories about George Bishop. So she'll be sharing those with us in a little while. But of course, like we always have to do, we got to talk about some history to start with. George was a great supporter of the national sale that we've been talking about the last few weeks, the international sale, so I'll plug that again. We need some more consignments for the international sale. Times have changed a little bit compared to George's day. In his day, there was, always usually 100 to 200 and some in there. He purchased some high sellers before, and he consigned some high sellers. So we'll be talking about all those tonight. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight is he had one of the most memorable prefixes ever, and he had some mottos and taglines that he created just for POAs. He was a great promoter, but three of the most famous POAs he ever bred didn't have the St. Nick's prefix. So we'll be talking about that tonight and how that came about. Some of that was because he was a master of getting his POAs in great hands and right situations. So we're going to talk about St. Nicholas Pony Farm, the greatest thing that has happened for kids since Santa Claus. George coined that early on. George was a prolific advertiser and writer in the POA magazines. He would write ads kind of like they were stories. He'd take out the front cover, and later on that became the norm, but he was doing it years before families started doing it, honoring like their child when they aged out, or their supreme champion or a stallion or something like that. He was doing it in the 60s. And at one time, and we'll show him tonight, he had 3 December magazine covers in a row, 1964, 65, and 66, that he used 3 different pictures to promote one of his stallions. So that was cool. He's got the 8-horse hitch there, all POAs. They're all, like blanketed or leopard POAs. So just a little history on George. He was raised actually in Texas, kind of in the panhandle near Canyon, Texas. He did go to college, and he became like a physicist. He got a job with a chemist, basically, is what he was, with Phillips Petroleum. But he worked his way up with Phillips Petroleum. He once wrote that he started digging ditches with Phillips Petroleum and worked all the way up. But he ended up vice president of some section, or maybe a big part of it. And he had a great job with them. He worked for him for 40 some years when he retired. So he got to move around the country a lot with them. He ended up in Utah for them, and in Oklahoma. He tried to get some POA stuff going in his part of Oklahoma up by Bartlesville, but he found it was a little tough. He was good friends with Lynn Puffenberger, who was over in Cherokee, 100 and some miles away. But then he ended up going back to Utah. He was in Canada for a while working. So he was married to his wife, Sarah, for 64 years. They had three kids, sons George III, because George is George Bishop II, the person we're talking about tonight. So he had George III, Nick, and then later they had a daughter named Sally. And Sally's who's kind of really got them into POAs, and it's a cool story we're going to talk about. So like I say, they lived in Okmulgee, Oklahoma for a while. Then they went back to Utah, near West Bonneville, Utah. So the story goes that Sally, when she was 4 years old, she got a trike for Christmas. And there again is the St. Nick Pony Farm. And there's a picture of George, good picture. He was always a great promoter. Sally wanted a pony, she said. She said the trike was great, however she put it as a 4-year-old, but that for Christmas, maybe it was her birthday. That's what it was. It wasn't Christmas, it was her birthday. Actually, it was March 24th, 1962 is when she turned 4 years old. and they gave her a trike. And of course, the family was all proud of this little trike. Well, she put them on notice that basically they had a year to get her a pony. And as it turned out, George went on a hunt looking for the right pony. He'd bought some Shetlands for his older sons. He didn't think they worked out too good disposition wise. So he stumbled on to POAs at the 1960, I believe, 62 Utah State Fair. And that's when he ran into a POA named Little Beaver. And then he found out about POAs through that, and he was sent the catalog for the Boomhauer and Barrett dissolution sale when they broke up their partnership. It wasn't really a dispersal sale. It was just that Mr. Barrett was getting older, and him and his wife wanted to travel. So Boomhauer and Barrett decided to split up their herd. Boomhauer actually bid on some of the POAs and mares in the sale and bought some of them back. But George drove to Iowa and attended this sale, and or maybe he flew, I'm not sure. But this was in February 16th, 1963, which I think is funny because that means, you know, he was getting close on the deadline. But he'd actually bought a solid filly by Little Beaver named Ebony, and I don't think she ever did color up. But he attended this sale, and he purchased Bear Paw II, or Bear Paw II. And of course, Bear Paw was by Boomhauer stallion Bear Paw at the time. He started out as Koretz Comanche, but he was a son of Koretz Scottish Chieftain, and then Hand Shah was an early champion by Black Hand. So George figured if he wanted to start a breeding program and start raising POAs for kids, that he'd start out with a well-bred POA, which Bear Paw II was back in the day. I hope people can see me because I haven't seen any comments, so hopefully I'm live. Can anybody see me? No comments. We've been going good the last two episodes. We haven't had any problems, but now I think we're having some technical problems. There we go. I can see you, they say. Okay. Sound looks good. All right. So there. Hey, Terry. Thanks. Some other people are saying hi, too. I just can't see your name. So if you want to call out your name, that's fine with me. So sorry for that little delay there. I was just getting nervous because I was talking and hadn't seen any comments. And I thought, well, maybe we're having a glitch, but we're not. Anyway, George Bishop paid $3,000 for Bear Paw II in 1962 as a yearling, which was a lot of money. And the fun fact is Bear Paw II's registration number is 1962. And George always joked he's the only POA that the year he was born is his registration number. So that was easy to remember. But anyway, there's Chris. Hey, Chris. So $3,000, when he wrote about that in the early 80s, he said it'd be like $10,000 then. So here's Bear Paw when he grew up. And of course, George was a master promoter, like I said, and he became a great breeder, but he was just a good promoter of POAs, and he would do things. This picture went all over the world. I'm surprised POAs didn't grow bigger than they did with George's help, because he helped spread what POAs could do. You know, he wanted them to be a ranch pony and a pleasure pony and everything else. And I'm going to have a cool story about when the height changed to 54 inches too. But Bear Paw was their first real famous POA. And here he is. The Mitchell family was close to Bishop's and Susie. So this is the Mitchell family here. Eli Mitchell was from Utah, and he raised his kids with Bishop's POAs, and they helped George a lot with the POAs. This is Bear Paw II here driving. So this is the second cover. The one with the deer on it is the first one, and then this is December of '65. That's Sally Bishop in the front with Bear Paw II, and then that is Jeff Mitchell, one of Eli Mitchell's sons, on Bear Tracks, and I believe his name might have been St. Nick's Bear Tracks. But He becomes a half brother to a real famous mare that changed Bishop's breeding program forever, and that would be Tana Tonka Beaver Stars. And this is a son of Tana Tonka Mist, who was the mare that produced both those. But Tonka Beaver Stars ended up being a famous brood mare in POAs. So that was another cool cover using the scenery of Utah, the beautiful scenery. And I don't know, this wasn't the first color photo on the cover, but it was close. He said he had the first action photo ever, the one we just showed, that one there. So he did have some great covers. So here's Bear Paw 2 when he was an old man, and them are grandkids there. And some of their POAs went on into Colorado and different places where the Bishop's kids moved to, and they took some of the POAs with them when they had their own places. So here's a cool picture. This is their first show ever, and Bear Paw's in this picture. That's a pretty cool picture there. I think that's his sons, and that's probably Eli in that picture. But that's an early day picture of Bishop's. They won all 3 of their classes. And I believe that was a Montana show. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was a Montana show. So here is the pony he ended up buying to fulfill Sally's wish, even though she rode some other POAs. She was consigned to the Boomhauer and Barrett sale in early of '63, but she didn't sell, so they consigned her to the international sale the same year, but in the fall, of course, so the fall of '63. And the story, this is one of George Bishop's cool stories again. Hans Ewa is how you pronounce that, lullaby. And she was an own daughter of Black Hand. He got the catalog in the mail. He decided he wanted to purchase her. And he liked mares. He always thought he'd buy mares for the kids and grandkids to ride and then go ahead and breed them later. And anyway, he wanted to buy this mare, but he wasn't going to the sale. So he contacted Daryl Dalton, who was an early POA breeder from Utah, and he was big into racing. The DeLeos was the Daltons' POAs, and they had some fast POAs with Kootenai's Wee Willie. George Bishop ended up with Wee Willie's sire, Kootenai Kid. But anyway, Daryl Dalton informed George right before the sale that he was in Pennsylvania, and he wasn't going to be able to get to Mason City in time to bid on the mare. So George contacted another famous POA person at the time, one of the most famous, and that was Bob Corrett. Bob Corrett had just become the president in '63 to fill in the vacancy of Dr. Fowler Poling when he passed away. And so he asked him if he could bid. Well, the thing is, he told both men that he wanted to go up to $700. Well, the day of the sale, Daryl Dalton ended up making it to Mason City. No one talked to each other. Of course, you didn't have phones back then or Facebook or anything like that. So George says, we ended up paying $700 for the mare because both men bid on it for Bishop's, but they kept her until she died of old age, of course. You know, years and years later, a lot of Bishop grandkids ended up riding this mare that was purchased for their daughter, Sally. And here's some cool pictures. There's Sally at 6 with Hans Ewa, own daughter of Black Hand. There they are at the 1965 International. That would have been in Utah, I believe. This is the very first POA that was born on St. Nicholas Pony Farm. And I was lucky enough to find this. I knew I'd seen this, but sometimes finding the magazines, you know, when you have a stack of magazines and sales catalogs. But like I say, George liked to put stuff in the POA magazine, and this was Black Cloud. I don't know if he was St. Nick's Black Cloud or what. I didn't look him up, but he was a cool colored POA for their first one. And here he is. It's a little grainy photo, but there he is a fat gelding pulling a little sleigh there on wheels in a parade, it looks like. So the Bishop's POAs, they went on for a long time, and they worked. They had jobs to do, even the ones they kept, and of course the ones they would sell ended up being really good longevity. So another grainy photo, but a cool picture. A lot of the family members there, and some of the Mitchell family, a bunch of the early St. Nick's foals. Nice shot there. So this was the 3rd December catalog, and that's Eli with some of the Bear Paw colts. You can tell the coloring a little bit, how the one in the front's changing color. I believe one of these fillies might not be by Bear Paw, but it was for advertising for him. And again, a beautiful colored photo from Utah, and a cool photo. They had a photo, the story goes, they had a photo shoot, and this was one of the photos they snapped right at the end as they were getting ready to put the colts away. And this is the one they used for they didn't use any of the planned pose photos. They used this one. So welcome, Linda. I hope you've been listening. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you want to comment your name or make a comment so I know who you are, if you just want to sit back and watch the show, that's cool too. If you just joined us, we're on episode 21 talking about George Bishop and St. Nicholas Pony Farm. So here's some of the early days St. Nick's, and I'm just gonna tell some stories while I'm showing this. So one of the cool stories, and I'm gonna read this so I don't screw it up, is George Bishop asked Bob Corrett, again he was a lawyer from Butte, Montana. He had Corrett Scottish Chieftain and a lot of famous Corrett's POAs. And he was an early time POA breeder. And George asked him if you could make money in POAs. Now remember, this is in the early 1960s, probably 62, 63. And this was Bob Corrett's response. Quote, "Well, I wouldn't promise that you could make money, but I will guarantee that you will make $1 million worth of friends." And of course, George said that's exactly what happened. He maybe didn't make that much money in POAs. He probably spent more than he ever made, but he made a lot of friends in POAs, and a lot of people remember who he was. So here's St. Nick's Beaver Bars. Again, another thing I want to get across is George believed in putting Appaloosa and Quarter Horse and even Thoroughbred blood into POAs early on. Now, George got on the board of directors fairly early, and he was with another young man, a man a lot younger than him. They got on the board at the same time, and that was Lynn Puffenbarger. And they had kind of a dilemma at the time. POAs was still in its infancy, and they didn't know if it was even going to make it for sure. It was a brand new breed, but the sale was going strong. The new show was going strong since 1959, and that sale since 1957. POAs were starting to spread across all over the United States and into Canada. But the big issue was the height was 52 inches, and Les Boomhauer wanted it to stay at 52 inches. He was the founder, the creator of the breed, and some other people, such as maybe George Bishop and Lynn Puffenbarger and some other board members, wanted to go to 54 inches because they just felt it was going to be better suited to put in a little more horse blood and for the ponies to be able to do more things with bigger kids, bigger riders, and to accomplish more in performance. Well, George tells the story I read last night that the NAPI Association, National Pony or whatever it was, started to grab hold in the 60s, and Les Boomhauer decided maybe we better go to 50. So things kind of flipped, but George talks about kind of, the controversy and everything and some hurt feelings, but once it went to 54, he started putting in a lot of horse bloodlines. And here's a Kootenai Kid and a Bear Paw. This is POA to POA, St. Nick's Coots Paw. But you can see on a lot of these, like the Beavers Comanche, that's by an Appaloosa stallion, Utah Comanche. And then out of St. Nick's Pony Mares, another Utah Comanche. It wouldn't take long for him to want to put in some really famous blood, and he looked to 3 bars for that. Here's a quarter horse sire of St. Nick's Flying Bars. Here's a picture of Kootenai Kid. They had Kootenai Kid, and I believe Sally rode him for a while, but he was a fast, he came from the Daltons. Daltons had Kootenai's Wee Willie and Kootenai Kid, and that's a cool story there, how Kootenai's Wee Willie, the son, was actually the famous race POA, and they wondered where he got his speed, and one day they just raced Kootenai Kid, and they found out he was fast too. So this is a picture. Of course, POA racing died out, pony racing kind of with the young kids and everything. Again, the age limit was only 17 for a while, and things were a little different. adults didn't ride them in shows and stuff like that, just halters. So due to insurance and different reasons, racing POAs kind of went by the wayside, but it was a big part of it in the early to mid 60s. So here's another cool thing that you don't see a lot of, but again, the Mitchells and the Bishops wanted to promote POAs any way they could. They called this their all Kootenai chuck wagon hitch. And that, of course, them were all related, and they were all registered POAs, and they would take them to events and state fairs. And he talks about a little bit here, the three chuck wagons. That's a lot of POAs being represented. And here again, here's Sally Bishop and I think Jeff Mitchell riding Spotted Fever and Kootenai Kid as outriders for the Wells Fargo hitch. So one of the young stallions that he purchased to put into his program was Lannon Series Super Dot, and he used him for quite a while. One thing George did believe in, he believed in also, in continuing to grow POAs as far as bloodlines and what they look like, and so much so that he knew they had to progress. And I believe it was in 72. In 1972, he gilded Bear Paw 2 because he realized POAs had went on so much from the early 50s or the late 50s, and Bear Paw 2 had great POA bloodlines and was a good POA, but it was the old style pony, and things was changing so much. So he looked to this colt here, Lannon Series Super Spot from the great Lannon program in Nebraska, Dr. J.P. Lannon, and here's when he purchased him. He was sold for $1870. That was the high seller. We probably talked about him last week during the sale episode. And here's the ad. Everybody put in ads when you'd purchase a POA, especially if they brought some money. And this was Dr. J.P. Lannon's ad about congratulating George Bishop for buying Lannon Series Super Dot. So Super Spot went to Ray Peets in Spencer, Iowa, and Super Dot headed to Utah. And George kept quite a few of his daughters that he would cross later on to some horses and to some of his bigger POA stallions. Shirley, hi, thanks for watching. So after Lannon Series Super Spot, Dot, like I said, he wanted to get some horses and more horse blood in POA. So this picture you see here was the result of it was the first foal he had by the quarter horse stallion Diamond 2 Bar. And the story of that is that he was living in Oklahoma for a while when he was working for Phillips Petroleum, and he'd ride up to the sale with Lynn Puffenbarger once in a while. Lynn would pick him up. Anybody that knows Lynn knows, our new Lynn knows, he liked to have company when he would travel. And the two men got talking, and George told him that he was looking for a thoroughbred son or a quarter horse son of the great thoroughbred 3 Bars who helped change POAs, helped change the quarter horse breed. He made the quarter horse breed, as we all know. The quarter horse wouldn't be what it was today if it wasn't for 3 Bars. So Lynn Puffenbarger, the man he is, he discovered a quarter horse at Blue Ribbon Downs named Diamond 2 Bars, and he contacted George Bishop and made arrangements for George to get the stallion, which he did. And I believe he had him in Oklahoma, and I think he probably went out to Utah as well. And George raised quite a few POAs by him. Of course, the two most famous would become Salty 3 Bars and Barkeeper. And that's two of the horses I'm talking about earlier that didn't have the St. Nick's. Now, Lynn stopped by the Bartlesville place, or near Bartlesville, one year after the sale, I believe, and looked at some of the foals that George had there. And George kind of owed him a little bit for finding Diamond 2 Bar, so he struck up a deal. I think Lynn bought 3 fillies and this colt. Lynn always told me he was a dark colt sucking on a red mare or a sorrel mare or something like that, and he just really liked him, and he fell for him. So George knew that Lynn was a good promoter too, and he'd probably get some stuff done with him, which he ended up doing, of course. So he sold him the colt. He hadn't registered him yet. He wanted Lynn to name him St. Nick's Good Bars. And of course, Lynn put Salty on him for his prefix, and the rest is history. Salty 3 Bars. And there's his pedigree right there, Diamond 2 bar, an own son of 3 bars. So that means in 1972, you had an own grandson of 3 bars, the thoroughbred. And there's Little Beaver, the horse we talked about earlier. I believe Roy Baker was the gentleman that had him, and he helped George a lot in his early days as a breeder because he had Little Beaver, and then he had the Tonka Beaver Stars. Well, he had Tonka Star Mist, that mare on the bottom there, and then she had St. Nick's Beaver Tracks and Tonka Beaver Star. So, you know, Lynn had Salty 3 bars for quite a while. He won the International, won his class in '75. Then he consigned him to the sale. He was purchased by Kurt and Judy Phillips, Dr. E.C. Phillips Jr. He was a dentist from Xenia, Ohio. Again, his wife Judy was one of the great promoters of POAs as well in the '70s and up to the mid-'80s. And they kept Salty 3 bars for about 3 years, did a lot with him, won quite a bit of stuff with him. Some of the Ohio breeders started breeding to him, like Olin Ziegler and Charlie Brope, some of the great breeders. Got some good POAs out in the Mid-East and, you know, Eastern Midwest over there because of Salty 3 bars. And then the Phillips consigned him in '78, and Lynn Puffenbarger bought him back for his son Tommy, who was about ready to age out. He had a couple years left in POAs, so he decided to get Salty 3 bars, and because he was a modern-looking horse and a big stallion, so the teenager could ride him. And he broke the record for stallions in 1978, as we talked about the other last week. And so here's a good action shot of him, probably in Oklahoma City. I know that's Oklahoma City. And of course, Salty 3 bars became the sire of Tudor bars. Salty 3 bars passed away in 1983, and Lynn had decided to sell him again because Lynn always keeps, just like George Bishop did, keep upping his program and switching it around and doing things with different stallions. So he consigned him to the sale, but he passed away before the sale. That was the fall of '83. In the spring '84, Tudor bars was born. Of course, this is Matt Ensley. Troy Lane also rode Tudor bars. Tommy Puffenbarger broke him out. Charlie Densmore put the finishing touches on him before he went to these two young gentlemen. But of course, he won a lot of classes. To my record, which is the official international list, he won 59 international classes, Tudor bars did, and he's an own son of Salty 3 bars. So here's the other famous full brother. Again, these are out of Tonka Beaver Stars and the 3 bars Corridor Sun Diamond 2 bar. And this is an early photo of Barkeeper. Might not be the greatest photo of him, but there's not a lot of photos of him, and I have some better ones, but I just want to show all the photos I can. And these were modern in length and modern in height POAs. Now, Barkeeper was a little over 54 at the time. We're not going to get into that too much, but the limit would change a few years later, so it was all kind of a moot point. But at the time, they couldn't show him, so Salty 3 bars went on to win Grand in '79, and Barkeeper was sitting there in Utah, and they felt like he was a better horse. His breeder liked Barkeeper, I think, better than he did 3 bars, so he had to find ways to promote him. And one of the ways he did is he sent an airplane ticket to a POA gentleman who was a great promoter and big in POAs in Colorado, and that was Ken Bateman. He had kept asking Ken on the phone to come look at the stallion, this young stallion he had in Utah, and full brother to Salty 3 bars, and Ken kept telling him he was busy. He was a school teacher and had a ranch, raised a lot of POAs. They had horses too, and finally, one day he opened the mailbox and there was a plane ticket just from Colorado to Utah. But he hopped on a plane, and Ken Bateman told me the story that first time he seen him, they opened a door and he come running out of the barn into a, like a paddock, and he said his heart jumped. He said he couldn't believe it. He was the best POA he'd seen at the time, and he just fell in love right there. And of course, Barkeeper ended up headed to Colorado then with Ken and Wilma Bateman, and they had Ken Wills POAs. Of course, later they would divorce, and Ken would go to Idaho and start another POA program, and him and Jackie Bateman, the JKBs. So Ken he did a big part in POAs, and he helped George Bishop, just like Glenn did with Salty 3 Bars. Ken helped make this POA famous. This is the famous shot of him here, would have been the early 80s, and they use this picture a lot. So they were kind of getting frustrated because they couldn't show Barkeeper, and they started getting his foals out there, and they were promoting his foals real well. And before they'd even really shown much, they just brought some well-bred fillies into the sale, and they brought a lot of money. And so they decided to syndicate Barkeeper, and that caused all kinds of stuff in POAs. It made him a household name for sure, and a lot of people bought into it. I believe they had 40 shares, and Ken Bateman told me they sold all 40 shares. It was supposed to be $1,000 a share. So anyway, it was a source of controversy too, because some people that weren't connected to the stallion didn't believe in the syndicate, or they didn't think POA should be syndicated. But George Bishop, he was a promoter, and he seen Easy Jet and horses like that in the late 70s, early 80s, a lot of quarter horses and race horses were being syndicated, and he just thought he would do this to POAs. But it definitely did bring another ring of fame, a claim to fame to Barkeeper, being syndicated for $40,000. He's considered the first syndicated POA. I don't know if others have been. Some historians say Dragon was syndicated, but that was just basically 3 owners. It wasn't like shares like this was with breeding shares and a modern day syndication. So here's a picture of him that Jackie sent to me. Unfortunately, I didn't get the colored picture up here tonight, but this was a picture I just snapped out of Spots Included. Of course, Barkeeper's a chapter in that book. And here's Ken Bateman. They were able to get him back when he was in his older age, when he was in his probably late teens or 20s. Ken and Jackie moved him to Idaho and got to use him. He's actually 28 years old in that picture, and that's the thing, reading the 3 Bars thoroughbred look in there. Look at that neck at 28 years old, and just look at that body. And and his mother was a little bitty POA, old bloodlines, old pony, but he had that modern look because of 3 Bars. So, not seeing any pictures, okay? Is anybody else having trouble seeing pictures? Bill in Wisconsin's not seeing any. So I'm going to keep going. Here is one of his first superstars. This was in 1979, as it says, and that's George Bishop there. They sold this filly, Barkeeper's Barbie Doll, and she set the record at the time. And I believe she sold for like $22.50 or something like that. I think she broke Highview's sister, or one of those fillies from the early 70s, broke her record. Bill, you might want to check your connection, or just make sure you're on the right thing. If you can hear my voice, you should be able to see pictures, because other people are. So $22.75, there we go. I don't know who put that, but that's probably right. So, and she was sold to the Goits from Texas, who made a big splash in POAs for a little while, and they bought up some really nice POAs. They had a good eye for horse flesh, and here's a good picture of her. Like I say, Barkeeper was, Salty 3 Bars was a 72, I think, so Barkeeper was a 73, so he wasn't very old. He was only 6 years old when this picture was taken, but they wanted to promote him, and this filly helped do it. And there's the ad, of course, the St. Nick's Pony Farm ad, congratulating Brenda and Mike on their purchase of Barkeeper's Barbie Doll. And she was a good-looking filly, and she grew up to be a nice mare. I know there's probably some people watching tonight that have connections to her. And she ended up being a brood mare. Here's one of her Texas bred foals. This is KK's Tiger. When the Reams consigned him to the sale, Reams loved Loud Leopards, and of course, because of Tipo Dragon, Norm Stevenson stallion, this guy was Loud. Laura Koss ended up doing well with him. I think he became a Supreme Champion, but he was one of the high sellers one year at the sale, probably in this sale right here. And he was a Barkeeper's Barbie Doll foal. So here's a cool cover. Now this was the Bateman Ranch in Colorado, and this is Barkeeper. This is about as cool as breeding shot as you get here. The brood mares in the background, and there's Barkeeper on the left there. And if you go right in front of Barkeeper, there's a mare and then another little baby, and then that baby with her head down. That became one of the most famous POAs and one of the best performance mares of all time. And that's Kenwell's Barmaid. And we'll go back again to the colored picture. Just soak that picture in with the hills, the foothills of the mountains there, and the green grass in the front. I just love that picture. And Barkeeper just looks, like a wild black stallion, and here he is, a POA stallion, been a known grandson of 3 Bars, and running with his herd there in Colorado. So Kenwell's Barmaid changed everything. She kind of really made the syndicate legit because she became so famous and so good that a lot of people wanted to have a Barkeeper offspring. And of course she had good breeding on the bottom too. A Kenwell mare, SS Jackpot, was a good stallion for a lot of years. That's Spud Snyder, but he went to a lot of programs in California and stuff. Then of course Oz's Minute Maid was from the Zigglers, and she was the 1975 Grand Champion mare, shown by the Batemans that owned Kenwell Ranch, so Ken and Wilma Bateman. And anyway, this filly beat her little sister's record, or older sister, I guess, Barbie Doll's record. She sold for $2,700, as we see here. And so that helped Barkeeper at a pretty young age. He was, 7 years old in 1980, so he had 2 high sellers, the 2 highest selling fillies in history, and they went back to back. And of course, Barmaid was just a handsome filly. She was a pretty beautiful mare. Here she is as a yearling. She was pretty big as a yearling, but of course that caught up with her. She never was a height problem. As she roaned out, she kept those 3 white socks and those black legs. Here's a picture of her again, taken from Spots Included, and just a beautiful mare. She won so many classes in performance. Of course, the Andreas family had her for a long time. The Jones family in Wisconsin had her. I know I'm missing a lot of families, but she was in Tom Walmsley's barn for a lot of years. They never used her as a brood mare, and I don't think they ever gamed her. She just became a pleasure machine. And I wrote this caption here: 19-year-old Kenwell's Barmaid and 16-year-old Missy Andreas. And then I cut some of it off, but I consider her right on the real short list of greatest POA mares ever. And it was all for what she did in the ring. So that, again, helped Barkeeper. Here's another colt that unfortunately he didn't live too long. This is a yearling picture here, but this is Ken Bateman holding Kenwell's Bartell. Actually, he was just, I think he was Kenwell's Bartell, but they called him Bartell, and that's because his mother was an all-horse mare, but she was a hardship POA Supreme Champion, a Gaiman Deluxe named Telly Doe, and Steve Bateman showed her and made her a Supreme Champion. They bred Telly Doe to Barkeeper and got Bartell, and he won the world. He won the international, I think, as a 2-year-old. And unfortunately, they sold him. I thought I had some more pictures of him, but they sold him as a, I think, 2-year-old. And he went to Arizona, I think, to a newer family, and a freak accident happened, and he passed away. I think just days after he arrived in Arizona, or he would have, with his color and breeding, he would have made a mark in POAs for sure. So here's St. Nick's Tawana Bar. She's maybe didn't stay as famous in history as some mares, but she did her part to be famous. She's the grandmother of Russ T. Bars. She became the mother to Mr. T. Bars, bred by the Erdmans. You can see here Erdmans from Wisconsin bought her at the sale, and she's a 1979. Again, look at the mare. Tawana 2884 is her mother. So early POA. The grandsire of this mare says it's a 46.5-inch sorrel. So probably just a pony stallion. And anyway, I believe she might have become the mother to Ivy Lane too. I might have that wrong. So hopefully somebody can correct me. So anyway, she did become the mother of Rusty Bars. And there she is again. She spent most of her life in Wisconsin, I believe. So now we're going to get to an interesting story. And this is St. Nick's Beggar Bars. If you say you remember St. Nick's Beggar Bars, you probably don't, because his name was changed and he did become a famous POA. I know Tracy Keene, she must not be watching tonight. She must be tied up because she hasn't said anything, but I know she would know who he is. But we're about ready to call our guest tonight, and that's Kelly Curtis. I grew up with Kelly, and she was in Wisconsin. I was in Minnesota. Of course, I didn't ride, but the first show we ever went to was in Winona, Minnesota. I was probably 9 or 10 years old. My dad comes walking in to the barn area with me, and this girl comes flying up on the snowcap gelding, and big smile on her face. We knew some people from a sale. We'd been to a sale, but she goes, "Hi, I'm Kelly Curtis. Welcome to the POA show," just like she was there to greet us. And it was the coolest thing, and I always remember that memory. And of course, then we learned who KC Colorado Chief was. So, and he started out as St. Nick's Beggar Bars.
KC Colorado Chief was. So.
Hey, I hear my voice, Kelly.
Hi there, I can hear you.
Hey, you might have to turn down what you're watching there, the show. Turn it down a little bit.
Hi there, I can hear you.
Yep, see?
Okay.
Okay,
there
you
I
go.
just cleared up.
So,
yeah, got it.
I feel like a DJ growing up listening to night shows and stuff. Turn down your radio, man.
You're doing great.
Oh, thanks. So how are you doing, Kelly? I haven't talked to you
I'm
in
great.
30-some years. But
I know, and it is just fascinating watching this podcast because you are just such an expert at all of this, and I love the stories.
Well, my mom and dad said if you can't be good at everything, just pick one thing. So I picked POAs to try to be good at, and I couldn't ride.
Well, you done good.
Oh, thanks. So I just learned all the history, and try to talk. I'm good at talking, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, good. Well, we're at your part of the George Bishop story, of course, and
yeah,
it's a cool story, and then it had other cool stories, for years too. So that's the fun thing. And I don't want to get too sad or anything, but I just want to say sorry about your mom. I loved your mom.
Thank you.
Jean, she was a true character. My dad always liked talking to her because she was like my dad. She never met a stranger, and she would talk to people, and they could talk about anything, so.
Yep. I know. Yeah. It's funny to hear your recollection of me, like meeting me at the show.
Right. I'm sure you don't remember that.
Funny.
See, I'm the nerd. I remember that because here's this girl with this big smile. I had no idea who you were, but then then we start getting the magazine years later, and then too. But here you are with him, and then later Bido Tough Cash, and I'm like, yeah, I've known her for a long time. I know that girl.
Oh, it's so cool. I love it.
So you guys bought him, I think, from this catalog picture here. It would have been. He would have been about 2.
I remember it.
Yeah,
remember. I remember this picture. You bet.
Okay, so he was probably pretty green broke, wasn't he? I mean,
he was green broke. I remember he only had one lead, but he, but I could get on. I have a picture of me, riding him, of course, in the sale, like the arena that was outside or whatever, and. He was kind of had a spring in his step, and he was just a sweet horse. But yeah, he was, you just never really knew what you were going to get with green broke horses. You hope for the best.
Right.
But yeah, he only had one lead. That's what I do remember that.
Okay. Well, you got going with him pretty fast because here's some colored pictures here with you. But you ended up Supreming him, right? You made him a Supreme.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And right.
Yeah.
And I only had him, I think I sold him at about age 5. So I only had him for those, 3 years I showed him.
Right.
And, went from, the very beginning to everything. And I mean, he just, he had such a personality. And I never had him professionally trained or anything. I mean, we just didn't have the money for that. So it was just kind of whatever I could teach him myself. And I mean, I was green broke myself, so I didn't necessarily know that much myself.
Right.
He was my first horse, I mean, he's the first, Larry Gibson was an amazing mentor for me for, a few years before I got Chief, and I rode a horse named W. Latch's Bow. And I remember he was so rough. His trot was so rough. I remember once I was at a show and I kicked him, like trying to get him to take a lead, and my boot fell off.
Oh, wow.
So, but anyway, that was my experience up till then. So yeah, I mean, I guess Chief and I learned together.
You learned together. Well, since you brought up Larry Gibson, we should talk a little bit, even though this is about George Bishop, but the Eau Claire, Wisconsin, it was just one of those phenomenons, like Decatur, Illinois became that way, Rochester, Minnesota, but Eau Claire, I mean, I don't know how many families joined POAs, but there was a lot of them over the years from Eau Claire. And you were right in that mix. So.
Yeah, and Larry was so instrumental in, getting kids involved. Just an amazing guy.
Right.
But yeah, so Chief, he was my first horse, and we actually bought him with some money that my dad gave me. So that was like one of the, things that he got for me. He wasn't involved at all, but he paid for this horse.
Right.
And Chief was, he, like I said, he had just so much personality, and like it was all about schmoozing him. You weren't going to tell Chief to do anything. Like you didn't. There was not. He was gonna. He wanted to please you, but we just had a really good connection. And he was really, really good at English. So, and it was because of that spring in his step. He was just so. Perky with his headset, and and he loved to stretch out, and so English was lots of fun.
He was one of those POAs though that just seemed like when you sold him, you said he wasn't very old. You didn't have him very long. He seemed like he was 10 years old because you had accomplished so much, and he just seemed full bodied and just a big old gelding, but he really wasn't. He was in the prime of his life.
You're right. He didn't. Yeah, right. And he, I remember going to, and it's too bad I couldn't keep him longer. I was trying to pay for college, so that was like sort of the thing, is that trying to, sell him time at the prime or whatever and start over with the young one. And, but I just, the times I remember it shows the most with him are when I would be out, messing around with the rest of the kids in the arena, and I'd have nothing on him except a baling twine around his neck, just being a show off is what I was doing. I was doing reining patterns with him, with just a baling twine around his neck. I remember thinking that was just the coolest thing.
Right. Well, that's because you rode at home. You practiced at home and rode him down the road, I imagine. And,
Oh yeah. I mean, he was pretty bulletproof, but boy, I guess I really respected him. Because I always assumed, well, he could decide to just dump me if he wanted to.
Right.
Yeah. I think my favorite story about Chief in terms of showing was it must have been, he was a 3-year-old, so it must have been the 1981 International. And I was in 9 to 12 English. And there were several heats or whatever, and we kept making it to the next round or whatever. And so we were in the final round. There were 11 horses in there. And, I thought he did great, but, look at all these great horses, whatever. So they started in 10th place. They went from 10th, 9th, 8th, all the way down. And then it was me and Suncrest Uncle Sam was left.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, well, we made it a good run or whatever.
Right.
And they called me. So, that was probably the epitome for me. And and he was only 3, he's just, it was English pleasure.
There was probably, besides Uncle Sam, there was probably a who's who of POAs in there.
Of course.
Could just go
and I was
a
nobody. Yeah. I mean, Chief was a nobody. I was a nobody. But that was fun.
Well, you both became somebodies in POAs, and then you went on to make some other ones famous. But right now I have the thing that George wrote about you and your mom and the shirt you made, which I'm going to show a picture of that too. But I didn't read this out loud. I've had it on here long enough. People should have been able to read it while they were listening to you. But you guys created this shirt. I'm just going to go ahead and show it. That's a little far away picture there, but I have an up close picture. So that's your back as a young teenager. And then there's the close up. Your ponytail's blocking some of the horses, but you guys actually created that shirt, didn't you?
Yeah. My mom was very artistic. She was very good at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she liked to write and create things, and
Yeah.
and then the lead pony on the right there is Colorado Chief instead of a leopard.
Sure
It's a
is.
snowcap. So he mentioned that. Yeah.
He sure is. That's awesome.
So that leads us to 1983, and I have a story here you probably won't remember either, but
Okay,
we had our first full crop of kind of in 82, and then we had some in 83 from Max Nebergall. And Dad's running around the sale in Des Moines with a bunch of Polaroid pictures trying to sell some horses, and Bud Campbell or somebody said, well, Jean Curtis is looking for a colt. She's got a colt at home, and she just wants one to raise, doesn't want an expensive colt or anything. So we go over and talk to your mom, and I think we'd seen her at a couple shows anyway, Minnesota shows or whatever. And I think she was going to buy that colt from us for like $500 or something. He was just a snow-capped colt. We didn't know what we were doing. We were early on.
Sure.
Well, then here comes Springs Dandy Boy into the ring. And for a while, my dad didn't like George Bishop because he's like, geez, that guy wrecked myself. But go ahead and tell that story, Kelly, of what happened.
That's too funny. Oh, that's amazing to hear that story from you because I didn't know about that.
Right.
So we had sold Chief already. I think I had maybe even shown, maybe it was the year before. I don't remember. So when I had this Wheeling colt, they did a tough cash. And so I was planning the next year to be showing him as a yearling, and then I had Sally Bar, Lightning Sally Bar,
who
was
from
like
Carl,
2 or 3 years something. She was young too. I was just riding a bunch of young horses, and I mean, just trying to make something out of them and be able to sell them and make some money for college.
Right.
And so anyway, we were in the sale arena, and like not. That how people would sit in a sale arena. You're just talking to your buddies and whatever. And my mom and I were sitting together, and I'm pretty sure it was Larry Gibson was in front of us, sort of kitty corner or something. And we weren't paying attention to the sale ring, which is so typical too, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, Larry says, "She's up here." and then he was kind of like trying to get my attention. He's like, "They're talking about you," and I was like, "What?" And here George was in the sale ring with this little colt, a weanling, just a tiny weanling, just baby pot gut, furry. And he was saying, "Callie Curtis, if I buy you this colt, will you take him home?" And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
Because I just didn't, my brain wasn't there at all. And I was thinking I already had a weanling colt. I mean, exactly that. So like, how am I supposed to show 2 weanling colts? And so I said, well, what will I do with them? We're talking across the I'm probably 10 stories up or whatever, I'm in the seats in the stands. And he's like, well, I don't know, but if I buy him for you, you take him home. And it was a no bid. So like nobody was bidding on him. So I don't know if it was like $175 or whatever.
Right.
And he just convinced me. I was looking at my mom, and we looked at Larry because we don't have a trailer. So we look at Larry and we're like, "Can you bring him home for us?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've got room."
Right.
We're like, "Okay, sure." So then he bought Springs Dandy Boy for me, and I went back to, meet this colt, and he was just a cutie, just a little fur ball.
Right.
And so that was like quite the story at that sale that year.
Yeah, I was sitting in the stands with my mom and dad, and that they stopped the sale because George stops it, and he was the showman, and he goes, "Is Kelly Curtis in here?" And you didn't even hear him. Yeah, he did.
No.
Yeah. And then he goes, "Yeah, if I buy," I think it was Omer Kruger or one of his friends. It was George's breeding anyway. He's like, "If I buy this colt," well, he was connected to the colt anyway. But yeah, he got him, and he wanted to reward you. He knew he wanted to get stuff that was connected to him in your hands anyway. So
that's so sweet. Yes, yeah. What a guy! I mean, what a special man. So so I ended up showing these 2. We gelded him, Springs Dandy Boy. We gelded him so that at least they wouldn't be in the same halter class.
Right.
And then we traveled all over the United States with that, first they were yearlings, and I was also showing Sally Bar, and then as 2-year-olds, I was riding them both.
Right.
In different, don't
Right.
even know, but we sold him as a 2-year-old in I think it was the fall sale, and yeah, I mean, he was just a sweet. He reminded me of Chief, because he had that personality that was just, it was like he was always looking at you out of the out of his eye,
Right.
like,
Don't tell me what to do, but I'll do it anyway.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, I'll let you know.
I have the picture up here from the '85 sale. You're
Yes.
holding him. Yep, and the little girl's
Yep,
on him.
that's the one. Yeah, yeah. She looks so cute on him. Aw.
Yeah, Tracy's
Yeah,
on here
he-
now. So Tracy Sweet, Tracy Keene, she's a
Yeah.
historian too, and she's on. She was working some babies tonight, so she joined late, but she's saying hi to you. So
I see. Hi, Tracy. That's awesome.
yeah, so them were some cool stories, about George, and
so
he was
good.
just a guy like that. I wish I would have got to know him better, but by the time I was in my 20s and stuff, he was older. I got to meet him a few times, like '83, I talked to him and stuff, but he was just such a promoter. I've said earlier on here, I can't believe POAs didn't get bigger. If he would have been in like Iowa or somewhere instead of Utah,
Right.
it probably would have. But he was kind of out there, and he had to travel a ways to get to things. But yeah, he believed in POAs for sure. He loved kids, and he loved POAs. So
Yes. No, really, gosh, what a fun recollection tonight. This has really been fun.
so you went on to have a pretty good life and career, right? I mean, I
Yep.
like to brag about POA kids. So you're an author, right? Didn't you write a book?
Yes. Yep. I've written a book. I write curriculum now. I'm a school counselor.
Okay.
It's yeah. I haven't had horses now since I was a young adult. I guess raised kids and kind of went a different direction. But
All right.
certainly always had wonderful memories of my time with POAs. It was just a really special group.
Well, you have a good-looking family. I'm a Facebook stalker, so I always that's why I
Thank
don't
you.
have to talk to people, because I'm like, oh, there's Kelly. Oh, her son got a car. Oh, her daughter's traveling Europe. Oh, Kelly went with her this year. And I'm like, oh, Kelly's feet hurt. It's funny.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you pretty much have that all covered.
Yeah,
Good
well,
job.
Facebook, that's how I stay in touch with people. So, but anyway, yeah, well, I don't have any horses right now. It's just tough sometimes, but you got to go different directions.
Right,
But I love the memories and stuff. And you were always nice to me when I was a kid. So you were,
Oh,
you were
well,
a
you
little
were
older
fun.
than me, but I would
Yeah.
always get mad sometimes, and you'd come over. We showed some babies against each other before, and you'd be like, just calm down, you're okay. And then you'd just walk away. I'm like, Kelly talked to me. That's cool. So, but,
I love it. I love it. Well, keep up the great work. You're
All
doing
right.
really
Well,
nice work here.
thanks for being a guest and honoring George. I knew you'd want to be a part of it, because he was a big part of
Absolutely.
your life in POAs. So,
Yes, I appreciate the invite.
okay. Well, you have a good night. You live in Minnesota now or Wisconsin?
Yes, I do. Minnesota.
Okay, so you're a Vikings
By the
fan
Twin
then.
Cities. Well, I wouldn't say that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's probably good anyway. So
Uh-huh.
that's why I moved to Oklahoma. I couldn't get tortured anymore. So
Yeah.
moved to a state without a team. So, all right, Kelly. Well, it's been a
Hilarious.
blast. I'm glad you
Yes.
you joined in tonight, and go ahead and keep listening, because I'm going to talk some more about some of the horse bloodlines George put in and stuff, and wrap
That's
it up.
awesome.
So, all right.
Thank you so much. Have
All
a good
right.
night. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. All right, everybody. That was Kelly Curtis, a famous POA youth from the 80s. She made KC Colorado chief, a famous POA. He went on with several families as well after Kelly sold him. I think Brock Allen rode him. Some people can correct me if I'm wrong, and I think a girl rode him too. But he became a supreme champion many times over as far as performance goes. So, and then this is the story here when that's one of my favorite stories. Of course, Kelly didn't realize, she didn't remember that my family was just a tiny little part of that. Dad thought he was going to sell a colt. I think it was like $500 or $300. We were going to sell this Chippewa foal. We had 5 foals at home, and we were trying to get rid of them. So, but anyway, that's some cool history there. So we move on to, after Diamond 2 bars and George had the own son of 3 bars, he decided to get an own son of Sure As Easy to kind of push POAs again. And everybody was kind of getting the sense that the height was going to go up once again. George had been on the board when it went up to 54. Now he was still breeding POAs in the 80s when they kind of seen that it might go to 14 hands. That was the rumor for a long time, which it did. But George bought Sure As Easy, an own son of Easy Jet, and bred him to POAs. And of course, he was a racehorse. Sure As Easy was, and I don't remember if he was AAA or not. I think he might have been. But again, he put a modern look in POAs, a long, lanky, kind of an English and a race type look, and helped stretch POAs out. So one of his famous POA's sons was St. Nick's Easy Bars, and Joan Anglin from Nevada had him, and of course her son Martin had him, and became a pretty good team out in Nevada. They were a good-looking team together and won quite a bit of stuff. And here he is at Ken Bateman is lunging him at we all recognize that Des Moines arena there. It didn't change for a long time, that outdoor little warm-up pen there. And that's Easy Bars. A lot of Bishop's quarter horse crosses looked a little bit alike. They had those little blankets and they just had that horse look. They had the pony mares on the bottom and then the horse on the top. So Tracy's naming off St. Nick's Bars here, Beaver Jet and Easy Bars. We're going to get to Beaver Jet. So here's another picture of St. Nick's Easy Bars. And then here's Martin. I think they might have said Martine is how they pronounced his name. I can't remember. But they were, like I said, a good team. He was a modern looking POA. A racehorse as a sire. Here he is jumping. And of course, this is a famous cover. George loved his covers. And this was taken in West Bountiful, Utah, I believe, this photo of the team. This would have been on the cover of, I think, 83, probably December of 83. So here's St. Nick's Jet Bars, another one of the Sure As Easy foals. And here's Beaver Jet that Tracy had mentioned earlier. You can see those long necks and just started adding some length to these POAs. Now, a lot of these were out of that old mare, Tana Beaver Stars. So, she was the mother to 3 Bars and Barkeeper. So, here's a really good mare, St. Nick's Easy Money. I always liked Easy Money, a good looking POA, real modern looking. This all would have been in the early 80s. Of course, they had the Barkeeper stuff going mainly from Colorado by then, so he was promoting his Sure As Easy POAs, George was. Here's Easy Kitty, another well-known POA, went on to do a lot of stuff. That's right, Tracy, not a lot of body, but very refined. You'd think with the quarter horse you'd have a lot of body, but it was race horses, so they were long and lanky, and they were, had a lot of thoroughbred in them. But this stuff is still in programs today. Here's St. Nick's Easy Keeper, went grand champion at the Utah State Fair. Here's St. Nick's Easy Does It, was the grand champion mare at that fair. Tracy said Easy Kitty was one of her favorites. She was a nice mare. So now this isn't Sure As Easy, but again, this is showing the bloodlines that he put in. So he kept a lot of daughters of Diamond 2 Bars, and he even tried to cross them on Barkeeper just because they were some of his best mares. Diamonds Are Forever was one of George's great brood mares over the years. And so he bred her to the son of Joker Spanish Fort in Appaloosa. And there's Tawana again. So look at the breeding, way back. He got St. Nick's Joker Bar too. And St. Nick's 4 Bars made a name for himself early on. The Rankins from California purchased him from George. And I believe they purchased Kenwell's Barmaid too. They had both of them. And here he is when the Rankins decided to sell him as, I think, a yearling. He went to Minnesota. Emery Davis was an early time POA breeder. He'd had Tomahawks bloodlines, Tomahawks, Mr. Minnesota, and he was a Danny Boy breeder. but he was trying to get a little more modern in the early 80s, and he used St. Nick's 4 bars. Here's St. Nick's 5 bars. He looked a lot like him, had the flaxen mane and tail. I don't know, somebody can maybe, if they know whatever happened to 5 bars, he didn't get his 4 bars, ended up as, just on a farm, so he didn't end up as a performance POA or anything. And maybe the same thing happened to 5 bars. So this is Wilma Bateman here, and this is a Doc's colt by Tough Plotted and Doc's Double Sweet, who ended up the mother of the Crisco Kid. And you might say, well, what's this doing in here? But it's because in 1983, Doc Demers consigned this colt to the sale. He was one of Tough Plotted's first foals, and he was purchased for $3,000 by George Bishop. It was the same sale that George said is Kelly Curtis in the house, and at that same sale, he purchased Doc's Just As Tough, this colt here, whose mother became one of the matriarchs of the POA breed, a solid mare, but she was the full sister to Doc's Tough Dude and Doc's Built Tough. And then she became the grand dam to the Silver Kid, and of course the mother to the Crisco Kid, and mothers to quite a few like Snowstorm foals and other great foals. So this was one of her first colts. I believe it was her second foal, because Doc's Bold Prince was her first one in '82. But George kept him, and this was kind of one of the last stallions George had. Of course, he's a baby here. I know they had some plans to show him with the Batemans, but I seen him. He brought him to the Stallion Row, I think in '86. He became a big, powerful POA, but George started kind of slowing down in the '80s. He'd retired in the '70s after 40-some years with Phillips Petroleum, and then in the late '80s, he just kind of started winding down a little bit on his POA breeding program. So here's one of the famous POAs he raised. This would have been in '85. This would have been, again, towards the tail end of his program, and this is St. Nick's Snowstorm. And of course, we're just scratching the surface tonight. There's been a lot of St. Nick's, and I just kind of highlighted the Sure Is Easy and the Diamond 2 bars and Barkeeper and Salty 3 bars, and now I'm going to talk about some of the Snowstorm babies. But St. Nick's Snowstorm ended up with Ray Peets, and he started raising some nice looking prospects, and that caught the attention of people like Larry Gibson and Jackie Guthrie, both from Wisconsin. They started making the trek over to western Iowa to Spencer and picking up some of his young foals, so much so that Larry ended up purchasing this horse and having Jackie stand him. Of course, Jackie made him a household name. He wasn't when Ray Peets had him, but Jackie made St. Nick's Snowstorm a very famous POA stallion with mares like this. This is Miss Crystal Snow, and she was bred by Ray Peets, but again shown to a national title in '93 there as a two. She would have been a 2-year-old filly, and she went on to have some good babies for Jackie. Here is JBJ's Miss Sable Snow. Ms. Sable Snow. She won a lot of stuff. I think she won did she win the Futurity as a baby? And then there's Blizzards Are Tough. That's Marcy, was Marcy Kruger, Marcy Merrill. Now I think she's Marcy Lassiter, whatever her last name is. But that's a Snowstorm colt and a Snowstorm filly at the World Show. And they did well at the World Show. They both won. And that was when Snowstorm was really getting popular in '93. Like I say, he's a 1985 colt. This is Driftwood's Dixie. Lisa Reckon sent me this photo. She had a couple Snowstorm POAs that did well for her family and did well on the West Coast. Here's Hercules. When Amy Winter consigned him to the sale, he was out of a well-bred quarter mare. And of course, the Snowstorm son. He became a good gelding for the Heinrichs family in Minnesota and won a lot of stuff. Was a really good, honest gelding. Here's JBJ's Firestorm. And his two most notable POAs that I know of is, of course, he has a son, his Dirty Dealer, that Terry, who's watching tonight, owns, and he's making a name for himself. Bob Roseland had some good POAs by his Dirty Dealer, and now Terry's getting some nice prospects by him, some good yearlings this year for sure that was showing up. And so that was Firestorm's the son of Snowstorm, and then Firestorm is his Dirty Dealer's sire. The other one is his Signal Fire, is a son of Firestorm, and he became a multiple grand champion gelding, and he was the Astons had him. So here's George. I wanted to include this picture because he took several trips abroad, and you can't really see it in this picture, but that's a POA magazine he's holding. This would have been in the mid 60s, and he promoted POAs all over, just not in the United States, but all over the country. He'd go to, like he went to the famous Vienna riding school, and he'd go to famous horse places like that, trying to convince people about POAs and how good they were, and and he would use stuff like the magazine as literature and stuff to show people. Here he is. I believe this is an instructor at that riding school, and that is a December magazine he's holding. He's telling them a story about something there, about one of the ads in the magazine. Another photo of that. Just a great promoter and a great guy. That we showed that cover tonight. That was from 1965, the December cover. So this was his famous motto that he come up with: breeders of high quality POAs. But then the greatest thing that has happened for kids since Santa Claus. And that was just I remember every time I'd get the magazine, I'd be flipping through, and there was a St. Nick's ad, because you'd see that tagline on every ad. And I think it was just clever marketing and cool. Tracy says, I met George at his farm in Utah when I was traveling to Florida from Washington. I'm sorry. I stayed with Tony Hugo. Okay, so that's cool. You got to see. I know it was beautiful out there. I was never out there, but I know he had a 98-acre farm that he bought to raise his ponies on. So here's an ad again. Blood will tell. He was all about the ponies, but he was about putting that horse blood in there. So this was his ad when he was in Bonneville, Utah, St. Nicholas Pony Farm. So here's the old mare, Beaver Stars, Tana Tonka's Beaver Stars. She's the mother to a lot of those EasyJet or Sure As Easy babies, and of course she's the mother to Barkeeper and Salty 3 Bars. And here she is in 1983, where they named this foal Hot Wheels, and I don't know whatever became of Hot Wheels, but I kind of was really reminiscent, and it made me smile. I read what he wrote about this ad, and it was a story in the magazine. Again, not really an ad, it was a story, and that's his grandkids there, 4 of his grandkids. And he said several things came to his mind watching his grandkids play with Beaver Star's latest baby. One is the Select Sire Futurity that had just started in 82, and she was eligible for that, and he wanted to see how she'd do competing against all the other good fillies across the country. And then 2, who was he going to breed her to? And that just made me think of all the great breeders, like Doc Nemers and people. My dad was always that way. He'd see a baby and he'd be like, okay, 3 or 4 years, we're going to breed her to something. And I said, well, we might sell her to a show family or something. But that was the same way he was thinking about this filly here. He said, by the time she's 4, I'm going to need to breed her. So he was always thinking ahead, and that's what great breeders did. So Kay Swink had a daughter in her program that they Supreme 3 Bars Beaver Stars. Okay, yep, that's right, 3 Bars Beaver Stars. And there was some daughters he kept of Beaver Stars too. Kay also had, as Tracy mentioned earlier, Kay had St. Nick's Snowstorm towards the end, or at the end of his life. So she had the Innkeeper for a while and Snowstorm, both little few spots. So Innkeeper was a son of Barkeeper. So they both had connections out there to Colorado and Utah. So I'm just going to show some of these pictures again, some of the famous photos and some of the POAs that George made famous. Bear Paw 2, this photo again, it was a famous photo. That looks like the Marlboro Man there coming out of the woods, but that's, I believe, Eli Mitchell. And this was a publicity shot. I mean, this was a set-up photo, but it's still a cool a cool shop that promoted POAs and showed that they're more than just a little pony, a little spotted pony. They could do anything. So, and there's Salty 3 Bars, another George Bishop product with young Tommy Puffenbarger. And then, of course, the classic Barkeeper. He was a great looking POA and he made a mark for himself. So that's the three I'm talking about: St. Nick or Salty 3 Bars, Barkeeper, and KC Colorado Chief were probably arguably the three most notable George Bishop bred POAs of all time, and none of them carried the St. Nick's. KC Colorado Chief had his name changed, which was fine, and George didn't mind it at all because he still got a lot of promotion out of it. And then they named Barkeeper for some reason, just didn't put this St. Nick's tag on him. I think they just felt he needed to be independent. And then Lynn put the Salty on Salty 3 Bars. So, but all great stories, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, I could go for another hour and I could show a lot more pictures. I will check my notes and see what I missed. I know I always like to mention all the Supreme Champions and stuff like that. So I need to mention that George Bishop has 50 wins on the leading breeders list. That's right up there on the first page still. And Ken Bateman, who used Barkeeper, he has 70 wins as a breeder. Salty 3 Bars has 66 and a half, and he's still ranked 11th. That's mainly because of Tudor Bars. Tudor Bars won 59 of those 66 and a half. And Barkeeper is still tied for 44th position. He used to be a lot higher in the 30s or low 20s, but he has slipped down. He has 32 wins, and a lot of those wins is, of course, because of his famous daughter, Ken Wills Barmaid. So the Supreme Champions with St. Nick's prefixes, I want to mention these. We have St. Nick's Serious Glory, St. Nick's Easy Bars, St. Nick's Tom Bar, and St. Nick's Eli's Keeper. They were all Supreme Champions. So, and I mentioned a lot of the foals by St. Nick's Snowstorm. Of course, I didn't get them all mentioned, but there was a famous Doc's colt that broke the record right before the real famous one, and that's Doc's Superstar. Was a Snowstorm colt. I mentioned Blizzards Are Tough, and that he was owned by Ray and Larry and Jackie, and then Kay Schwenk had him for quite a while and lived out his life with her. And JBJ Snow Angel was a great POA by St. Nick's Snowstorm, and of course Miss Crystal Snow I mentioned. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for joining. Sorry you were late, Tracy. Hopefully you can go back and watch it live. And thank you everyone else for commenting. So we had a lot of good comments again tonight. Tell all your friends this is available forever on Facebook. You just have to join the POA history group that's been around now for over 10 years. I started it out as POA Trivia, I believe in like 09 or 10, something like that. And then a few years ago, I switched it to the name POA History. And my POA podcast, Black Hand and Beyond, that's its home is the POA History Group. So it'll be there live every time I do it. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a show next week. I might take a week off. I know kids are going back to school and stuff, and it's kind of getting to be a busy time. And we're wrapping up summer a little bit. So I may take 1 week off and work a couple weeks on a topic and come back in 2 weeks. So if you don't see me next Tuesday, look for me in 2 weeks on a Tuesday night. Thanks everybody for saying great show, and thank you. You're welcome, and I hope you enjoy the song.